the same way. Moving on to calculated variables. These are variables that I can derive from my known variables and from my log variables. For instance, I can have averaged variables. Say I would like to have an average of the wind speed at every second. I will then create a new variable called true wind speed 30. I will select in all my predefined variables which one I'm to average. That's true wind speed in my case, and specify that it's meant to be averaged over 30 seconds. I can add comments. Calculated variables, that's quite powerful. It allows you to create new variables derived from others using all the different mathematical signs which you have down here. For instance, I might need to know what's the toe-in of my rudders. Toe-in is basically the difference of angle between the two rudders. So I will create a variable called rud delta, and the formula will be, very simply, rud port minus rud starboard. Now the format is also 1 decimal, units is degree, and in comments I will say this is the rudder toe-in. Right, similarly, I'm interested in having the value of the leeward rudder rather than the port or the starboard rudder, because leeward rudder is most probably the one in the water. So let's do this. I will call it rud lee, and the formula for this one is going to be a bit different, a bit more complex than the other one. I will use the IIF formula, which functions exactly like the if formula in Excel. IIF, if my true wind angle is greater than 0, which means that I'm sailing on starboard tack, then the rudder in the water is rudder port. So that's the value I want my rudder lee to take. If not, I want it to take the rudder starboard. Done. If the red disappears, that means that there is no error in your formula. Otherwise, mouse over will give you what the error is. Format, it's also in degrees, and we're done. Let's move on to the next tab. Manual entry variables are basically qualitative variables, or variables which cannot be acquired by a sensor. Typically, one of those would be sea state. I might, at some point, want to create a polar in function of the sea state, so I need to be able to specify that sea state, and the sea state might change during the day. Right, this type, there's 3 choices. It can be numeric, string, or from list. I've decided to make things easy to make it from list. It's going to have 3 possible fields. It's going to be -1, 0, and 1, where my convention will be -1 means small c. So I might put this in my comments. -1 equals flat c. And you can put as many manually entered variables as you wish. Moving on to the last tab, sail inventory. This is where you declare all the sails of your inventory. Further on in the program, you'll be able to specify the sail list for the day, and that will be derived from that sail inventory. So make sure you put all the sails you have. I'll just give you a few examples. I might add a mainsail called MN1. Add that and give it a weight. It's a heavy sail, 110 kilos. I might add a Genoa, G1. Add this as well, and on that way you have quite a extensive number of sail types you can pick from. Last tab I'm not going to go into just yet because it's still under construction, is boat configuration. Right, we're now done with the configuration. You only need to do this once and for all for a specific log file, and unless that log file structure changes, you won't need to go into the configuration process again. So I will go on and save this config file, call it myconfig.xml, and last little thing I want to do is to test it. Make sure I haven't made any mistakes, make sure it all makes sense. To do this, I go in Tools and try config on my actual log file. So I'm testing my config file versus my log file and see if my program is now able to read my log file. Well, it's all gone well, so we get an OK sign. Otherwise, you would have a full description of the errors. Right, I can close this. Now, I've got a log file and I've got a config file. I might need to specify start and finish times because sometimes the log will have way more data than is actually useful. Usually when you start logging when you're still in the harbor, or when you come home and you've got the motor on. These are all parts of data that we're not interested in analyzing. So you may specify a start and finish time. If you have been using my other tool called the onboard assistant, you would have an event file which would have a start and finish time which you pinged onboard, and this would be where you could a good time to click on get the start and finish from my event file. Last step, I have to specify a polar. The program cannot run without a polar, so my polar is in Deckman format, and I will go and find it now. It's called polar.d. And I can finally specify whether I want RaceReplay to recompute the entire performance variables such as boat speed performance and VMG percentage, all those variables, with a reference polar. Perhaps I was sailing with a different polar today, but because I want to compare today's data with yesterday, I want to make sure everything is compared with a reference polar. Well, that will close our first tutorial on how to configure the RaceReplay.